All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Greg from Jungle Scout, if you don't know me. I'm the founder of Jungle Scout, a research tool. We now have a suite of tools, including Fetcher, which is profit analytics, JumpSend, which is an email automation software for Amazon sellers, as well as Splitly, which is A/B testing for Amazon sellers. I have also been selling on Amazon myself for almost 5 years now. And we like to do these webinars 2, 3, 4 times a month. We bring on other experts in the industry so I can learn from them and all you guys can learn from them as well. So Mark reached out to me not too long ago. He's a buddy of mine. We've done a few collaborative type things before about giving you guys some really high quality information on going to China and going to the Canton Fair. I know that's something that can be a little bit intimidating to a lot of people, overwhelming. If you haven't been, you probably don't really know what to expect. And I think Mark tonight is going to answer a lot of those questions we have. So that being said, Mark, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, absolutely. My name is Mark Adams, and I guess as I get a little older, I realize I've been doing this for a long time. Greg was saying he's been doing it 5 years, and in Amazon years, that's forever. But I actually am old enough that I came along at a time I did this old school even before the internet. So I started out way back in July 4th of 1989. So I've been doing this 27 plus years now, and I started out with a chain of retail stores, and they were clothing stores, and we branded things and created our own items, and I was doing private labeling before I realized it was called private labeling. So every business I've done has had something to do with creating products, finding markets, putting those products in, and I've even manufactured before. I had a car bumper factory where we took and manufactured specialty car bumpers and under our brand and different types of things. So created wine. So as a winery, so we were a private label winery to where we would also do in manufacturing our own label, but we would label under other people's names as well. So I've seen this area, and I think about China, what we're going to talk about. Most of my buying career has been spent at trade shows. It's only with the advent of the internet recently that we're able to have it so easy. But this is stepping back a little bit in time, going back into China, doing things old school at trade shows. But gosh, is it sure effective and a great way to run your private label business.
Fantastic. With that being said, you want to go ahead and share your screen with us? I know you set up a slide deck for tonight's presentation.
I did, and let me click that. Hopefully everything will go right here.
Always with the live webinars, it's a little bit worrisome, right?
Greg, tell me you can see the red screen.
All right, we can see it loud and bright and clear.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, folks, what we're going to do, I'm going to go through this. It's not going to be very long, but I'm going to hit on some highlights. And ultimately, the goal here is to make you fully understand what the Canton Fair is and ultimately how to benefit from it. So we are going to go through this and then take some questions at the end. But literally what we're going to cover this evening is we're going to give you an overview of the fair, whether you should go or not, and really how to get the most out of your time when you're there, how to find products while you're there, and once you're there, what it's like dealing with suppliers, overcoming some of the obstacles to get there a little bit easier, and some things that I have learned along the way, and then the easier way to go to the fair. And then at the end, we'll take Q&A. If you hang around to the end, I'll give you a link to a product checklist that I've created. And this is something that I use quite often. It's really a good scoring system that will allow you to determine if maybe on the fly some products are going to work or not. So that'll be available as well. But a little bit of, if you just took a short second there in the beginning to introduce myself, but for those of you, some of you may know me, but probably most of you don't. But I create and sell my own products on Amazon and in e-commerce stores, Shopify stores, that type of thing. But I've been private labeling for, as I said earlier, for 27 plus years now. Done an awful lot of business, both online and off, and all around private label products. I probably in my career have attended, I couldn't tell you the count, but I'm guessing somewhere about 50 trade shows over the year. And I actually go to China twice a year to the Canton Fair and get my own products because I am a private label seller, but I also host a conference while I'm there called Private Label Canton, which is for private label sellers. Over my career, as I mentioned earlier, had a chain of clothing stores, car bumper factory, winery. So I've built up and sold things throughout, and which to me is really, I think, a goal and one of the advantages we all have being a private labeling. So I've been doing this pretty much my entire life, or adult life, I should say. Currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I do all types of things with Amazon and e-commerce where I create videos and all types of things. But I've done one of the larger courses in the space called FBA Head Start, and I do a podcast called Private Label Live and lots of videos and all different types of things where basically my entire life revolves around Amazon private labeling and e-commerce. If you think about the fair, one of the things that I think is universal is that whether you got a great tool like Jungle Scout or you're walking around doing whatever you're doing, taking a course, whatever, the hardest thing for people is finding products. Well, I think probably, and this sounds a little bit maybe the streets are paved with gold type of stuff, but I think the problem at the Canton Fair is filtering them out. And that to me is something that I jokingly say, if you can't find a 6-figure plus brand there, you're probably not in the right place. But ultimately, the Canton Fair is the largest wholesale market in the world. That's really all that it is. And it has been going on now, and I don't know the year it started. I read it every time I go over and forget, but I think it started probably in the 50s or 60s somewhere. So it's been going on like 50 years, and it seems to get bigger every time. They hold it twice a year in Canton. You'll hear sometimes Canton, sometimes Guangzhou. Canton is the English word of the name of the city, and when I say Guangzhou, and we all say Guangzhou, I'm not sure if we're coming anywhere close to the actual Chinese pronunciation, but it's the same type of city. They hold it every April and every October. Each phase, or each session, as we would call it, has over 20,000 different vendors. And just to give you something in a scale, where I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina, pretty big city, a few million people, we have a pretty decent like convention center, like any big city would. And when you go to your local boat show, car show, whatever trade show you'd go to, you might have 200, 300, 400 vendors, maybe. That would be a really, really big show. Each phase has 20,000 different vendors. And that's just when you think about it. One of the things about China, from people to land to whatever else, gosh, everything is just so much bigger over there. But anyway, each phase is 5 days. And really, when you're deciding to go, you need to decide what phase you want to go. Whether phase 1 would be electronics, household tools. Really, phase 2 is really more consumer items. And that's probably where about 95% of all Amazon sellers are going to want to go, because that's going to consist of most of the products that we work with. Phase 3 is going to be more office products, textiles, clothes, medical devices, things like that. So really, if you want to know a greater listing of that, you can go to their website, which is cantonfair.org. And I can never remember whether it's .ca, if that's it, or .cn. I think CA is Canada, but whichever, it's one of those. And I think I'm going to go with CN because I think that's what it is. But if you get the wrong one, just put in the other. When you go, it's free. But ultimately, it's just a gigantic private label fair to where instead of you going out hunting products on Alibaba, you're going right directly to the source, and the suppliers really are in one place, and you're going directly to them. If you're really thinking and deciding if you should go or you shouldn't, if you really think about this, we all know that things can be very competitive. And I always look at it and think and ask myself, I spend way too much time, my feet up on the desk, staring at the wall, thinking how I could be better, how I can be different than maybe other people with the products I'm doing. And, you think about it, Alibaba is a great way to go, and it's still a great way to go. However, that's where everybody's going. And I think as a seller, you got to ask yourself, if everybody's going to the same place, if the herd is going right, it's time for you to go left. If they're going left, it's time for you to go right. And that's kind of really where the fair goes in. It gives you the opportunity to raise the bar and go to places where not everybody's looking. Because, yeah, you'll see some duplication on Alibaba, but you'll see things at this fair that, gosh, you are going to see millions of products. And you're going to walk up and things and, gosh, I hadn't thought of that since a kid. I hadn't seen that ever. And it just kind of gets to be really interesting to see just the quantity of products there that very few people are going to have access to. Big thing here, though, is that you can go in and have custom products made. You're thinking it's going to cost a whole lot more, a whole lot different, but most of the suppliers we deal with are actually pretty small manufacturers, and they got to keep their machines going. So when you say, hey, can you make it like this, and you draw them a picture, it's funny. They'll scribble something down in Chinese, and you see the gears going in their head, and they'll go, oh, yeah, we can do that. So it's one of those things that really, I think it gives you the opportunity to have very unique items that's going to take a long time for somebody to catch up to, which, of course, is going to give you the head start in getting going and getting that product launched. We all know how expensive it is to get samples sent in and the time frame it takes. Well, here, of course, you can pick up the actual samples. You can feel them, touch them, see the weight, see the quality. And a lot of people want to know if they can take the samples home. If you're at the first part of the show, probably not, simply because they need it to use to show for the rest of the show. But if you make arrangements to show up with them at the end of the show, more than likely they will give you samples to bring home just because they don't want to pack them up and take them back. But if you do that, just make sure, use common sense and make sure you can get something on the airplane with you. So, if you're doing something like pocket knives, you probably want to make sure you're checking that in your baggage, or it's not so big that you can't get home. Another thing here is that, and a reason to go, is that you get to establish a face-to-face relationship with your suppliers. We all, and everybody talks about how important it is to get to know your suppliers and have the like and trust factor. When you've flown halfway around the world and the time and expense and effort to be there, they fully understand that. They just take you very, very seriously, and they treat you on a completely different level that you're not going to get through email and a Skype call. The other thing here is you're going to get better pricing. The consensus of the people I have taken to China is that you get about a 30% discount versus what you're going to get on Alibaba. Part of it is because they're there to deal. They're there twice a year. For many of them, this is where they make their money. But I'm sitting thinking of one attendee we had. His name was Ben, and I can still see him smiling now. Ben came running in. We meet at the lounge after the show each day. He came in. He was just like walking 10 feet off the ground. He says, "I just made tens of thousands of dollars." Oh, Ben, what happened? He says, "Well, I was paying," and I can never remember when I tell this story. It's either $315 or $351, but three something is what he was paying for his product. And he says, "I just found my same product for 51 cents. And he was just rightly so jumping for joy. And I think he had to buy a little bit bigger quantity. But he was sitting there smiling. He paid for his trip to China, and he made thousands of dollars going forward. And last time I talked to him, everything was working out great with that particular item. So you never know until you really go there and start seeing people what you can get. Because if you've been in this more than 2 minutes, you really know that there's a Chinese price and then there's an everybody else price. We all, for the most part, are still paying the everybody else price. I think more than anything, the guy was he needed money, and he just was able to quote a good price, and it worked out well for everybody. The other thing here that I do is once I encourage people to go through and get your business taken care of, this is an ideal place for, quote, impulse shopping or finding things that are just new ideas. Because as you walk through, again, you're going to see things you never imagined before. And all of a sudden you start to see something, your gears get going, they get turning, and it's like, gosh, that can make a brand in itself. And then there's 4 other products that go along with that. And you would not have thought of that in 1,000 years unless you'd have walked by that booth. Ultimately, when you go to the fair here, you're going to be able to separate yourself from the masses. Now, I'm going to sit here and tell you have to go to China to have a successful Amazon or e-commerce business, private label business. Obviously, you don't. Many people have gone without doing it. This is just ultimately a way to jumpstart your business and to leapfrog people if that's really what you want to do. Plus, it's kind of fun to go to China. I mean, growing up, I never thought I would go to China. When I grew up, it was China and Russia were going to nuke us. So we did duck and cover drills. But here I am thinking that. And I'm thinking, Toto, we're not really in Kansas anymore. So you're standing there in a whole different land. And it's kind of one of those epiphanies in life and saying, this is kind of nice. So personal and professional reasons, I guess, of who and shouldn't go. If it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't, but maybe the travel part did to me. Now, when you go, and just we talked about earlier about how big things are, I put this particular drawing in here because I want to give you a sense of scale. When I talked about the trade show or the convention center in Charlotte, this is 20 buildings that they got through here. And they got some temporary buildings in the back during the show and all this. But this little building you see here, this is the size of your local convention center. Like, for instance, this floor, I think it is. This building here, I think building 17, I think it is. But anyway, it has like 4 floors to it. And I walked in one floor and I was just overwhelmed by the vastness of vendors. And I walked through and I counted like one aisle and then I multiplied how many vendors were on each aisle times the number of aisles. And there are probably more than 500 vendors on this one floor. And on this one floor is nothing but clocks. And it was like grandfather clocks, watches, anything having to do with timepieces, digital watches, old-fashioned watches. And I'm just sitting here thinking, can you just imagine a trade show having 500 vendors? That many vendors. There's probably not that many vendors in the United States selling clocks, much less having them there in China in one place. And then that's just one of 4 floors on this building. You'll see things like maybe in this building, you'll see consumer goods like bathroom items and brushes and, I don't know, toiletry, stuff like that. Here, maybe they've got like a toy section, like the stuffed toys and more consumer products and different things. Just to give things a scale, best I can tell, this is the bridge that's over the street here, and this takes you to the rest of the fair, but this is about half a mile. And this is so big that they got like little carts, golf carts, that you get in and just take a circular route just to get you across the street and all the way over. But it's just huge. So it's just, and then over here, you've got things, I think in this building, you've got like gardening supplies and all different types of things. And over here, you've got some ceramics and pet supplies, and then there's other consumer type products. But ultimately, 20 buildings with nothing but just stuff in it. And then when you think out of the 3 different sessions, it's just amazing to think of that quantity of items that are in one place. It's funny, I had jet lag one time, and I think I went to phase 1, and then I couldn't sleep, and of course, in the way to phase 2, just to watch 20,000 vendors move their stuff out and have another 20,000 waiting to come in. I think I came in, I was staying at a hotel here or something, so I came and just watched people here because I just had a bench out there or something. And the funniest thing is just watching Chinese people, what I presume, cuss at each other as they were all getting aggravated because they were all fighting for the same space. But anyway, not that that's relevant, but it was just rather entertaining to watch this many people move in and out. But again, I can't stress enough the vastness of this and what it is. So most people go to one phase, but if you want to go to multiple phases, you can do that too and do something in between the 5 days where they're breaking down and setting up. But all in all, just a huge complex of things to go. Finding products. Let's talk about this for a second because I think this is really where the rubber meets the road. You should decide on what phase you want to go to, or as I just said, you can go to multiple phases. However, the vast majority of private label sellers are going to find products primarily at phase 2. When you're going, I think this is really kind of the strategy as you go through. I think if you come in with existing products, you want to look for vendors who are selling what you're selling, and then start talking to them, negotiating, and maybe you can be like Ben and find where you can save that tremendous amount of money on your existing products. Get all your existing business then taken care of, and then walk through what I call a day of discovery or the idea of discovery, to where you're literally impulse shopping. You're sitting there thinking, walking through, using that checklist I mentioned a second ago, and you're thinking, okay, would this make a good Amazon product? Is the size right? Would the retail price be right? Are there searchable keywords that I think could work for this? And whether you use a phone or write it down on a piece of paper, your notepad, whatever you're doing, write all those down as you walk through that discovery. And just again, when I take people on a guided tour, we do this every time. We take one floor, which is again about 500 vendors, and then I point out all what I think are potential Amazon products. And we write them down, and I give them that list. And then what their job is to go back that evening after the day and sit in their hotel room and bring out Jungle Scout and then enter some keywords and things for what they think would be keywords for the items that they picked. You go through and you're going to find the price is not right on some, or it just doesn't work. The market's too competitive. The reasons you normally use Jungle Scout. And I think you're going to probably eliminate somewhere 40 to 45 of those 50 you wrote down. This can, in many ways, can be a numbers game. So you're still left with maybe, let's just say, 8 to 10 products. You go back to those particular vendors, and then you start talking with them. And you're going to find that out of those, 8 to 10 vendors, some of them, the price is going to be too high. The delivery is too long. It's just not feasible. The MOQ doesn't work. For some reason, it doesn't work. But ultimately, you're going to be left with 2 or 3 products out of that 50 that everything falls in place and they make truly viable Amazon products. So whether they end up making $500 a month or $5,000, just that one floor alone could make your business, and then whatever. And then as many as you write down, you've got potential products to go back and work after you get back for as many products as you want to add. So in this, I think it's relatively easy to find products. Like all things, there is a process of elimination. But once people go through, and the second day when they come back, I'll say, how many products did you find? And some of them will say 42. I found 57. One person had like 500 or 600. They had a lot of work to do in the evening that night. But ultimately, you're going through and you're weeding these things out. So as you go through, after going through so many different times, I think I've taken 4 groups over now, I think it is. And next one will be 5. But it's something that you got to understand. This is really why you're there, and you got to be laser focused on finding products. And if you are, then it's going to come very, very easily to you. And again, all of them are not going to work, and you got to accept that. However, what you have left over, what falls out of the bottom of the funnel, that's going to be pure gold. Now, when you're dealing with suppliers, you've already come back, you found your products, you've gotten there, you know what you're doing, you know the purposes. you got to realize too, everybody thinks that they're not going to speak English. I will tell you, they will speak English extremely well and much better than they realize they do. And I find I've traveled to like 30 different countries now. And one of the first things I always do, I even did this, and people in France were nice to me when I did this. I told them how well they spoke English, and then they relaxed, and then because they're afraid they're going to make a mistake. But once you're polite and compliment them on them, they'll relax and they'll talk to you. Now, here's something that I find, and Greg, I don't know how you teach or go about this, but one of the things that almost everybody seems to think somewhere along the way that the Chinese supplier is going to scam them. Well, I have found the Chinese people to be very nice and polite. They're kind of like people from India. As a culture, they're very nice and polite people. I actually kind of find it refreshing here versus Western cultures. But it's kind of taught here by many people to go out and tell them when you're dealing with a supplier, to tell them you're a vice president of purchasing, or you're this or you're that. And if something comes up, you got to check with your boss. Well, to me, I find that kind of a little bit disconcerting because you're the one starting the relationship out with a lie. And to me, that seems a little bit of an enigma, because who's scamming whom at that point? I assure you, they don't care whether you're selling on Amazon or whatever else. They're just like anybody else. Are you a good and viable buyer, and how much are you going to buy? They're certainly aware of Amazon and everything else. I mean, I literally go and I'll tell them, I said, I have a large e-commerce business in the United States, and I'm looking to add, and whatever their product is, I'm looking to add that to my line. Can you tell me a little more about it? And I think if you go with that approach, and then they'll eventually ask you for a card or something like that, give them a card. Tell them you're the owner. And that to me has always worked out well. Now, I realize too, they have to make a profit. There are some people out there who will negotiate down to the lowest nickel. And again, I think that's good and fine. However, I believe that you want to have them make a little bit of money off of you, because there will be a time when you need them. And the reality of this is if you send them an email, you want your email to be the one, oh, there's so-and-so. I want to, let's see what's good coming out of him. I like him. I want to help him. So be nice to him.
Can I just interrupt you real quick? Because I just want to emphasize like those two facts, because it's refreshing to hear you say both those things. And I'm really glad you did. And one, that I think like a lot of people are like so worried that like a lot of these Chinese factories are just like so out to get them and like so out to scam them, where like I've dealt with a lot of factories now. Like I've never had like a very like a bad experience with it. Right.
They will bend over backwards to accommodate you.
Right.
If you're going to be worried about getting scammed, it's buying American.
Yeah. And I think also like, I mean, I guess it's just kind of like anything else in the news though, right? Like those few bad stories are the ones that get talked about and publicized and et cetera, right? But like at the end of the day, your chances of it is actually like very slim. And then the other thing I just want to emphasize, like some people, are like so quick to like want to try to like negotiate down, or like switch to another supplier because they're like 5 cents cheaper per order or whatever. And just like you said, at the end of the day, like if you're still making like a good profit, like there's nothing wrong with like them making a little bit of money too. Like if you just like haggle them so hard, like they just don't want to deal with you anymore, your orders are gonna be the ones that get pushed to the end of the assembly line. You're the emails that they don't want to answer, like all that kind of stuff. So I just want to interrupt because I couldn't agree with you more on those two things.
Well, appreciate you doing it, because I mean, again, it's so simple. And again, I've been doing this so long, and I've learned everything the hard way, I guess. But people say that, and that's why I always put this in, is I don't know anybody else who says it that way, because the first time I heard that, I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. And I started thinking about it. That just seems counterintuitive to me. And, but, quick story talking about, bending over for nickels and letting dollars fly by. My very first product, and it was the very first Christmas going in, I thought I had ordered more than enough. And, I had the horrible problem of my sales exceeded my expectations. And I was about to run out. I knew I was going to run out. And I called the guy and said, look, man, I think I'm going to run out. Normally he produced incredibly quickly for me anyway, like 7-8 days. But he says, okay. And then I got an email an hour later. He says, okay, we're good. And he got his stuff out in 2 days. So I don't know if he made his staff work. I don't know what he did, but the difference of the fact that, because I don't remember the dollar amount now, but I probably made a couple $1,000, cleared a couple $1,000 more because he was willing to work with me because I had treated him well and we got along, versus that nickel I saved per item. Greg, and that's, to me, that's just the way I think you ought to do things, because I think you ought to try and do it for the long run. But yeah, appreciate you chiming in on that, because we miss some of the esoteric things sometimes as sellers. We think it's all about price, when ultimately all we're really doing here is dealing with people. And the Chinese people are more like us, and they're different. They well, they don't have mortgages but they have rent, they have families, they have things they need to pay for. They want a better life. And that's if you can communicate on a human visceral level, the rest, man, it's just downhill, you know? But anyway, that's a simple negotiation. This is not a one-shot car thing. This is, you got to have everybody walk away feeling good about what you're doing. But anyway, talking about cultural stories, Greg, you'll appreciate this as a young man, and I'm obviously not a young man. I'm 53, soon to be 54. You go over to China, and things are mostly the same. You know, if you're expecting China to be, you know, the pull carts and the straw hats and the whatever, man, that's long since gone. It's modern interstates and 100-story buildings and high tech, and it's. You close your eyes, you can take the Chinese writing off the buildings and the Chinese people. You could be in any city in any Western part of the world. But anyway, so it's funny. So I'm going in now. Also, too, you got to understand part of what makes all this possible is their openness in their economy. Communist country, but yet they really have a capitalist economy. And about 20 years or so ago, they started teaching English in all of the schools. So the people who are really, really fluent in English now are all in their early 20s. Okay. When you go through the fair, what you're going to find is the person who owns the company, 40 to 50 years old, they're usually in the back of the booth. Every single booth almost has a 22, 23, 4-year-old, very attractive Chinese girl there. Well, okay, whether you're 18, 80, whatever else you are, there's not a man on the planet who doesn't want to think that the opposite gender finds them attractive. All right. Okay. I've been married 28 years. This is, I'm harmless and whatever else, but this is a funny story. So by their very nature, these girls are extremely polite when you walk in the booth. And it's almost to the point from a Western standpoint, you feel like they're flirting. Now, I know they're not, and this ain't my first rodeo. I know they're after the billfold. I get that. But you walk in enough of these, you start thinking, these girls are digging me, man. I'm kind of getting this. And your head swells up to the size of a basketball. So I'm going along, strutting along all these thousands of booths and everything. And you go in, and each girl's prettier than the last. Now, you got to realize over there, the climate is a lot like Florida. It's hot, it's muggy, and it's humid. I walk in this one booth, Greg, and I'm sure I had perspiration on my brow here. And I walked up to the girl and smile, and she smiles, and she hands me like a plastic bottle of water. And I say, thank you. She bows, and she says, in China, we learn to respect our older elders. And it's like the poor girl, she sucked the mojo right out of me. Like my big head and went, psh, as all the air went out. And it was just funny. And I'm just sitting there. I kept a straight face. And, the little girl did absolutely nothing wrong because she was just being polite, ultimately polite. But I'm just sitting here thinking I guess I got what I deserve for letting my head get big. But, as you go over there, you will just, some of the funny things that will happen, you'll be telling stories for years from some of the cultural things, from like the way the cab drivers drive 1,000 miles an hour and lanes and stoplights are only minor suggestions. And it's just similar stuff. But anyway, funny things happen when you're dealing with people from a completely different culture. When you're talking about travel arrangements, that's a whole nother thing that people seem to be a little bit intimidated by. When you go to China, you will need, of course, your passport. Now, you also need an entry visa. And I do stress entry visa here. I used to do this and say visa. And I had a lady ask after the fact, said, I have a MasterCard. Will that work? I said, no, I think we're kind of talking an entry visa here. Now, if you're going from the United States to Europe or vice versa, very, very easy to get in and out of the country. What China does is they make you pay to come into their country under the terms of an entry visa. And the way you get an entry visa, and I know we have people here from all over the world, and I don't even begin to understand how it is in all the different countries we have of people listening here. But basically go and Google getting an entry visa to China and then enter your country. So in this case, entry visa to China, United States, or America or something. And you're going to find here anyway that there are 3 consulates where you can get your entry visa. One is in Los Angeles, one's in Chicago, and then one is in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm like 6, 7, 8 hours drive south of D.C., and I'm not going to drive up there just to get a visa. So what you do next is you Google, if you're in the United States, you Google travel agent to get entry visa, Washington, D.C. And then you'll see several actually travel agencies come up. And this is the way the process works. You mail your passport to the travel agent. They walk to or go to the consulate, get your visa, and then mail that back. If you're there, you can walk in and do it for about $140. But they charge like $50 in mailing, like roughly $50, $60 to do that. So all said and done, it's going to take roughly 2 weeks and then about $200 or so to get your visa. Now, actually, you're going to find there's two types of visa, and this is something that confuses people terribly. So we'll take a second and talk about this. You can get two types of visas. You can get a tourist visa or you can get a business visa. A business visa is good for 1 year. I think both of these cost the same thing, but they're good for 1 year. You have to have an invitation from a supplier to have that process to come in on business. However, if you get a tourist visa, then that's good for, gosh, I can't remember. I think it's 10 years. And you just go back over and over again on the same visa. Now, people are going to say, well, I'm not a tourist. Well, who's to say you're not a tourist when you're there? It's not like, some communist World War II movie or something, or some Cold War movie where they're standing there with an AK-47 and saying, are you going to be here for tourists or not? They welcome you into the country. It's just like going anywhere else. But ultimately, my advice is to try and get a tourist visa. It's easier to get, and there's less red tape in doing it. Airfare going in. I don't know if it's a currency exchange. I don't know what it is, but it's very, very cheap to go to China. I just went to Paris, and from the East Coast, it's like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 hours or something, and it was like $1,500. I can go in 12 time zones. You can't take a longer trip in the world from where I am to China, and it's $1,000. If you're on the West Coast of the United States or in Europe, it's going to be somewhere at $600 or the equivalent in European money. Australian money, whatever it is. It's not very expensive to come in from Australia, even though it's still a long trip going north. So airfare is very inexpensive. Hotels, you're going to find they're going to range from about $150 to somewhere $300, $400 or something in that range. Now, if I'm traveling by myself, I can stay in a Motel 6. I don't care. If I'm with my wife, of course, I've got to stay somewhere much nicer. Another bit of advice that I would encourage anybody to consider, if you're not a big hotel person, I understand. However, if you ever want to splurge on a hotel, the one time in your life, this is the time to do it, because you're going to be jet lagged. You're going to be tired. It's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. You're going to be walking through the show at 2:00 on a Tuesday, and it's just going to hit you, and you feel like you're going to die. You really want to be able to get back and get close to your hotel and maybe lie down for an hour. And that sounds maybe soft, weak, whatever. But I had a 23-year-old go with me last time. He says, I thought you were just, trying to be funny talking about jet lag. He says, it took me a while to get back, and and he kept telling me, yeah, you were right about the jet lag and how hard it is. It's still doable, obviously, on the trip, but it's something you need to expect and to plan for. Because I actually had somebody had a Fitbit one time, and he walked through this with me, and he says his Fitbit said he walked about 10 miles going through the show. It's hot. It's humid. It's ideal to be able to come back every couple hours. I find I go in couple hour spurts and then come back and sit in the air conditioning and rest for a bit and then go back. So that way I'm sharper and everything else. But long-winded way to say, the nice hotels are right next door. So it's just like coming in and out of the building. You will take a taxi from the airport. You will find it's about 300 yuan, which yuan is their currency, which is the equivalent of about $15 or $15 for every 100 yuan is a roughly currency exchange. So roughly about $45. And the trip from the airport will take about 45 minutes. It's funny. You're tired. You've been flying all day. And at about the 30-minute mark, you go through a section of town, and it's all interstate. But you go through a section of town that's kind of old and, quite frankly, not very nice. And you're sitting there thinking, man, where is this guy taking me? He's going to sell me off to some work farm. He probably won't get much for me. but I'm sitting here thinking this is a little scary. But then all of a sudden, about 5-10 minutes later, he pulls up right in front of your hotel. He turns around and smiles. So it's kind of a neat thing there. If you do choose to stay at a hotel that is not as close, you can certainly take a taxi to and from the show, and they're not very expensive, and it's just time consuming and inconvenient to do it. Some of the other hotels that are semi-close will have shuttle buses. So if you stay like 2 miles away at a hotel, maybe they'll like drop you off at 9:00 in the morning and then come back and pick you up at 5:00. However, the first time I did that, I just took taxis because I couldn't wait that long. But anyway, that's your logistics of getting back and forth. When you go, you will need a show invitation. You go to the website I mentioned earlier, which is cantonfair.org. And again, we're going to go with .cn, and it may be .ca. I can never remember. But anyway, you just fill out the form, and then they'll email you, and it may take them a while because they got 200,000 people going to each phase. So it takes them all this time to process those things. But anyway, they'll send you back the letter. You print that out, and then you go through up to the registration line, and then they'll print you out a badge with your picture on it. Now, if you do go, make sure you save that badge, because if you ever come back again, you can use the same badge. Like when I go now, I just bring the same badge back and walk right through the security section. So pretty easy process, but you'll need that to be able to get in. You should carry cash with you. We take it for granted here in the Western world how easy it is just to pull out a credit card and pay for everything. The hotels and things like that will take credit cards, but they won't take it in taxis and things like that. And I would implore you to make sure you have Chinese money before you leave the airport, before you leave your country's airport, whether you do it at one of those exchange places in the airport or you exchange at your bank, because who knows what time of the day or night you get in, and those exchange places might be open. So I had one person who didn't take that advice, and they got stranded at the airport till the next morning because they didn't have any money and any way to pay the taxi driver to get them to the hotel, even though they were told that. So again, very, very important that you do that. And one thing while I think about it along this same line, I guess I should have typed in here, make sure you call your credit card company and tell them you were traveling overseas, because to banks, when they see a Chinese charge, they immediately think it's fraud. Again, they're not as open-minded as they could, and they're a little bit behind on their thought process. So last thing you want to do is be standing there at 4 o'clock in the morning and your bank's not open and you can't get to them and you can't check in because your card didn't work. So make sure you do that. Realize too, you will not have Google, YouTube, or Facebook. And because again, this is where we come back to a communist country, and you got to realize some things are being censored. You can get something with what's called VPN software. I have no idea what VPN stands for. Those of you who are technical in nature, I'm sure you know. I don't know, don't care. But all I know is it sends a signal outside of the country so you can access all these types of things. You just Google that, whatever you want. But it's like $10-12 for a month or something. You can get it while you're out of the country. So first time I went, I didn't know that. And I'm sitting here scrambling because I didn't have access to some of my things. And it was tough to be out of touch that long. Another thing you might want to do when you're traveling is consider coming into Hong Kong. You got to realize the geography are like this, where if you're in the United States, you've got places like Cleveland and Detroit and things that are built around the Great Lakes. All those industrial areas started there so they'd have easy access to ports. Well, Canton is just right up the river from Hong Kong. Hong Kong is the biggest port in the world. So if you're going to do that, the Guangzhou airport is big in itself, and I've heard different numbers, but they say Guangzhou has, I've heard as much as 14 million people. The airport there, of course, is very international and everything else. However, Hong Kong might be the biggest airport I've ever been in anywhere in the world. And you got flights coming in there every few seconds from all over the world. And if you want to go into Hong Kong, you can go in for a few days and do the touristy stuff there while you're there, and then take like a 2-hour train ride, which is like $30, going into Guangzhou. Another thing you might want to do, and this is actually what I'm doing in April, I'm actually going to go to Hawaii for me, which is about halfway, and spend 3 or 4 days there and then continue the trip on to Guangzhou. You could do the same thing into Japan or South Korea or anywhere else you wanted to go and doing that. So try and be a little bit creative. If you're going to go that far, you might as well get some fun out of it as well. And as far as travel arrangements, the only thing I would say is that whether it be a communist country or what, which I have not found to be an issue in any way or anything whatsoever, just realize that there's going to be anxiety in every travel that you go on. I just got back from Paris and Europe and this kind of thing, and quite frankly, I had more anxiety going there than I did going to China. So realize that's just part of travel. A lot of people ask about safety concerns. I don't know if it's part of their culture or not, but you walk down the steps or the street somewhere and you hear steps behind you and you get a little nervous. Here, I didn't feel that way at all. And nobody has ever felt intimidated or had anybody in my group ever had anything done to them. So I did have one lady, she was like 5 or 6 months pregnant. She came. So, again, you're not going back into some third world country. You're going to another modern country. This happens to be a few movies more than the trip to Europe. But you can go to markscottadams.com/Canton-fair, and all the information, the stuff and things for everything that you need to see there, and all the people talking about the trip. So go ahead and go there. Where we talked about the product checklist, you can go to markscottadams.com/checklist, and I'll show you that checklist, which as you're going through the fair, it'll help you on the fly determine if something is a good product or not. So one of the things that I also want to do for anybody who wants to go as well, because you're part of Greg's group and everything else, what we're going to do is instead of doing a half an hour consultation, we're going to bump that coaching call all the way up to an hour. So a little bit of a thing. I find an hour or 30 minutes is enough to do what you need to do, but you really get into it, we can get to an hour. So that's my appreciation for you being here for those who want to go. So with that said, Greg, I'm hoping to take some questions, and hopefully we've got some that we can answer. And my hope is that gives everybody a pretty good idea of what, whether the fair is for them or not.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for going through all that. I think everyone learned quite a bit. That was very good and thorough. If I was, and guys, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. While you do that, I'm going to go ahead and give two little tips that I think were useful for me when I went. And I'm sure you probably go over a lot of this stuff in your class too, Mark. But one thing that I found really useful is like you talk to so many suppliers every day, like so many factories, that it's really easy to kind of like forget who they are or forget what pricing they gave you or whatever. So someone gave this tip to me and I thought it was really useful, but it's like bring like just like an old fashioned, like, like notebook full of just pages. And it's really nice to be able to like staple the supplier's business or factory's business card to it and take notes on that. And then like each page is like a new factory. I found that really helped me a lot.
Along those same lines, let me interject there that even takes that one step further, is they will talk to thousands of people. They will not remember you. They may remember vaguely the conversation, but the ideal thing to do is if you find somebody out of these 5 or 6 vendors, whatever, who you really like, take a selfie with them. And when you email them when you get back, hey, this is me, and they'll remember you from the picture.
Yeah, Mark, you took my second tip, man.
Sorry, man. Sorry.
No, but I couldn't agree more. I did that. I took some selfies with the suppliers. They really like, like if you send them an email and they have that in the photo, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Like, hopefully he was really nice, had a smile on his face or whatever. So that's really good one. I will say one more thing. Especially me, being a millennial, like business cards, like we don't really exchange business cards anymore in America, like people my age. But in Asia and China, especially, it's pretty expected. They'll like ask for your business card. I think that's very much customary. So like, even if, if you're just a normal private label seller like me, you probably don't have like a business card for your business, but I would recommend getting a stack of them made with your email and your contact information and stuff on there.
I agree. $10-15 because you also need that to register. When you go to the fair itself. Now, the other thing too, talking about forgetting things, I always consider I had a pretty good memory and good sense of direction. But when you're at 20,000 booths, I don't care how good your sense of direction is, you get lost and you forget what building you're in or where you saw something. On these vendors, now there's and this is part of what we go over and more, but we'll talk about it now, is that there's actually a very logical thing to where each booth has a system of whether it's by booth and by building and floor and whatever else. Take a picture of the booth numbers that are printed there. And beside this piece of paper, either write it down. I mean, we can be old school sometimes too, but you will forget where something is. You'll go and you'll find, this happened to me. I had my 3 or 4 products I was going to go back to that next day, or 10 suppliers rather. One of them I simply could not find because I didn't write them down, thought I would. And I missed out on a product because I must have walked 2 miles trying to find these people. And for whatever reason, I couldn't find them. So make sure you're thorough in writing down the people you want to go back and see, because it's easy to get lost, and not so much get lost, but just not even be in the right place, because the floors all look alike, But,
yeah, that's a good tip. All right, Mark, I'm going to open up a can of worms with this question. I'm going to answer it first. I'm going to put the mic over to you, but there's a couple people who asked how Trump's policies or our current administrative policies could potentially affect, importing these goods from China. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys my thoughts on it real quick, and then we'll see what Mark has to say. But in my opinion, like, first of all, there's always things that you can be worried about in business, like this could happen or that could happen or this could happen. So like, I don't want to pursue it any further. And I think like if you're always telling yourself those things, you'll never like make progress in your business. So that's one of the reasons it doesn't scare me. Number 2, even if they did put a tax or a tariff on goods imported from China or any other area, the fact of the matter is, like if we'll use the garlic press example, right? Like if I'm selling garlic presses, all of those garlic presses being sold on Amazon are made in China, right? Or all the water bottles or whatever else. So at the end of the day, if there's like a 10% tax put on that or 15% tax put on that, in my opinion, at the end of the day, that's just going to be passed along to the consumer, right? Like, we don't have like margins big enough to all just absorb that. What's going to happen, in my opinion, is all the sellers are just going to increase the price by 10 or 15%. And at the end of the day, it's just the consumer who's paying more money for that. At least in the short term, like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, it may lead to more products being produced in areas that doesn't have that tax or tariff. But I'm not really worried about it. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with everything you said here, and let me kind of go in and add some technical thoughts to the emotional things of this. Regardless of your political leanings, and I never get into politics or religion, I guess, but we're seeing a lot of rhetoric right now that in reality is not going to things are not going to change. It's just rhetoric. However, I actually was trained as an economist. That was going to be my profession and whatever else, and I spent a large part of my life studying monetary theory and economic history. One thing about this is I don't think President Trump or his advisors are stupid. You might not agree with all the other stuff, but intellectually he's not stupid. And in this, that tariffs never work out for either side. And since China is, I think, only behind Canada now as our biggest trading partner, long ago, before World War II, countries were not intertwined between their economies. So wars really didn't matter. Now, I do know the simple premise is you do not go to war with your trading partners. If we go to war that puts our economy into a recession and then depression, China is the biggest owner of bonds of the United States that we issue as a government. When they stop buying those and stop and call those in, that's gonna crash their economy as well. So there might be some saber rattling along the way. So unless two Navy ships bumping each other and something escalates crazily, there's nothing going to happen here. And I'm 99% sure that 99.9% sure that all of this is rhetoric and it's a negotiation tactic. And it's very different than how I negotiate, but it is one way to do it. And he's just trying to and somebody calls his bluff, we're going to see what happens. But I'm just telling all of you who have thought this, the economic stuff, the reality does not support doing that. It's just to make people feel good. And I'm telling you, it ain't going to happen. So that's my trained economist view on the subject, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Laura had asked a little bit earlier, how do you keep from product overload? I'll go ahead and answer this too, and then we'll have you, Mark. In my opinion, you don't. The place is overwhelming. Just to emphasize what Mark had said earlier, I remember like when I first walked in here, you did a good job like showing the kind of the picture of like all those different buildings and stuff. And like I heard people before the first time I went be like, it's huge. Like I didn't understand the magnitude we're talking
nobody
about.
Nobody believes you when you tell them that.
You just have to go to figure out how big this place is. Like I thought like the conference center in Atlanta was big, right? Which it is, but like by like Canton Fair standards, it's tiny.
Mm-hmm.
So like my advice would be go in with like, and again, Mark said this too, but go in there with a list of products you're already looking for. Those are good areas to start because if not, there will be product overload because there's so much stuff everywhere. And it's like, man, I could be selling that and that and that and that. So it is good to do a little bit of homework and go in there with a little bit of game plan, in my opinion.
Well,
Yeah, Mark, Chris asked, how do you research?
Let me add on this.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Things on that. One is if you get a map of what's in each building, and let's just say, for instance, let's say you have zero interest in pet supplies, for instance, or ceramics or whatever the big categories that are there, just don't walk down those aisles. That would eliminate the vast majority of things like that. Now, the other thing is that you might see one booth, for some reason we had somebody who was interested in umbrellas last time. And I don't know if you know what a reversible umbrella is, but I didn't know, but it's a clever item and it fit all the numbers on Jungle Scout and all those things. So I helped him walk through and we were finding it. And at the first we saw a booth and we kept seeing, we walk another aisle, seeing it. And by the time you realize you're starting to see not only quantity of vendors, you're seeing a lot of repetitive vendors. So what I try and tell people to do is talk to a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 or 6. And if you keep coming up with other vendors, just forget about it. Come down to some tangible thing, and then you will be able to avoid overwhelm that way. But you're right. There's a certain amount of inevitability that you just got to be prepared for it. And I think if you know it, that's your best defense against being overwhelmed.
Right. Because, it's so crazy how there's so many products, like a whole row of like 50 booths selling like duct tape. And there's like 30 booths selling Christmas lights. And there's like 100 booths selling water bottles. And it's like, holy moly.
You cannot process it until you're there. You just can't.
Right. Yeah. You got to go to understand what we're talking about. And so we'll just answer one more question and then we'll go ahead and cut it off. We usually like to keep these about an hour. Chris asked, how do you research suppliers after you meet them? And I'll let you take that, Mark. What do you think?
Given not being a technical guy, I mean, I just try and get a feel for a person's body language, their just how well they treat me, how well they respond. some of the normal things. And the reality of it, I think at the end of the day, you just got to trust the voice in the back of your head that says, hey, I want to work with this person / company or not. I don't think there's anything tangible you can do, like verify their credit or things like that. I mean, because I figure in my case, and I don't mean this to sound the way it's going to sound. I know how it's going to sound, and I really don't mean it this way, but I'm spending a couple $1,000s. If the worst thing comes in and falls apart, I will be angry and I'll be upset. But the time for me to research to save $2,000, which probably is not going to be an issue, I just don't do it. And if I get hit, I get hit. I deal with it. But I just, if everything works out, I go with it.
I'll also add to that the Canton Fair, I don't know the exact amount, but I have been told by a lot of people that it's fairly expensive for these factories to get a booth there. That's why a lot of them don't end up going. So the people who do pay the money to go to the Canton Fair, I'm sure there's like a bad apple somewhere, but 99.99% or whatever, these are going to be reputable factories, right?
And they're there year after year. I see the same people in the same business. I mean, it's almost like these are the cream of the crop dealing with. These are not fly by night people.
Right. So I think some people are always like so concerned, about all these like scams, I'm taking your money or whatever but at the end of the day, most of these factories, A, they're going to be already pretty reputable by just being at the Canton Fair. And B, they want long-term business relationships with people, So, you have to make sure you're clear on the quality you expect and all these types of things. But at the end of the day, they want repeat buyers. Like it costs too much to acquire a new customer. It's much
Greg,
easier.
I used to have a manufacturing place. And again, you get so many people coming in and getting all these emails and things where I'm going to do $1 gazillion. And they get tired of hearing this. They roll their eyes. But if you're there, they know you're serious and they want to deal with you. And that's why you get better pricing. That's why they treat you better and all this kind of stuff, because they know you're serious and very likely to give them the repeat orders that they want. Because as a manufacturing company, you really don't make money until your first, second, third order, because you got so much upfront time that you don't get paid until your machines are just running constantly. So it's what you said is, I agree with 100%.
Right. But I will add to that, like some things that I think, like some of the reasons that I think like I've never had like a real bad experience is like I'm very clear like on the quality that I expect. Like I can't really emphasize that enough. Like if you get a sample, make sure it's clear. Like, okay, I want this part and that part. I even now like specify the type of like boxes that I want like the cartons to be, or the packaging of it. Whether like a written contract is very like enforceable in China is kind of like up for question. But what I do know that it does do is make it very clear what you expect like out of your supplier. So there's a lot of things you can do like that you don't have to be scared of doing.
And again, I think the more you spell it out, the better. And it's like if somebody's ever owned their own business and had an employee that didn't work out, the first thing they do is, oh, that was a bad hire, when in essence, probably they didn't train them well.
Yeah.
So here you got, in essence, train your supplier to do exactly what you want. Because again, they want to continue working with you. They have the incentive to do that, but it's your responsibility to spell things out and to be clear.
Yeah. So with that being said,
the wrong stuff either, because I'm like you. I don't do contracts, but I'm trying to be very specific.
Yeah. Cool. So that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Mark, thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Thank you for
everyone watching. It looks like just about everyone stayed all the way to the very end, which must means that you provide really valuable, high-quality information. If you guys are interested in going on Mark's trip, you can go to markscottadams.com/Canton-fair. I can tell by the pictures that you guys have a lot of fun. And, I hope to see you there, Mark.
Well, good. Like I said, you're always welcome to stop by when you're there. And you get special guest status. How about that?
All right. All right, Mark. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you
everyone for watching. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.